Welcome, seekers of lore, to a tale of devastation and triumph, the War of Wrath, the apocalyptic battle that ended the First Age and nearly tore Middle-earth asunder. This was no mere clash of armies. It was a storm of divine wrath, a reckoning so terrible that mountains crumbled, lands sank, and the very shape of the world was forever altered. But it was the final confrontation between the forces of the Valar and Morgoth, the first and mightiest Dark Lord, whose malice had poisoned Arda since the dawn of time. For 6 centuries, Beleriand had borne the weight of Morgoth's dominion. The great elven kingdoms Nargothrond, Doriath, Gondolin had fallen one by one, their ruins testaments to his insatiable hatred. Even the proud house of Hador, last bastion of the Edain, had been shattered in war and woe. When Eärendil, the mariner, finally sailed into the Forbidden West and pleaded for mercy upon the remnants of elves and men, the Valar, the powers of the world, could no longer remain passive. So, in the year 545 of the First Age, the hosts of Ammon marched to war, and with them came the storm. They descended upon Beleriand in a fury unseen since the shaping of the world. The ranks of the Valinorian elves, shining with an otherworldly light, marched alongside the Maiar, spirits of immense power, whose mere presence made the earth tremble. At their head rode Eonwë, the herald of Manwë, mightiest of all warriors in Arda. The skies darkened as great eagles soared, sent forth by Manwë himself, and beneath them a sea of golden banners unfurled in defiance of the darkness. But Morgoth was not unprepared. Though his power had waned since his prime in the days of the lamps, he was still a being of godlike malice. His hosts were beyond number, dragons now winged and deadlier than ever, Balrogs, demons of shadow and flame, and an army of orcs so vast that it seemed to choke the plains of Anfoglith. Yet, for all his might, Morgoth had grown cowardly, his strength no longer in himself, but in the legions he commanded. And so the War of Wrath began, a cataclysmic conflict that would bring ruin upon the world. The very earth groaned beneath the tread of gods and monsters, and the skies wept fire as dragons clashed with the eagles of the west. But the greatest horror was yet to come. For more than 4 decades, the war raged across the lands of Beleriand. The hosts of the Valar, unyielding and radiant, drove back Morgoth's forces in battle after battle. The orcs, once thought numberless, were slaughtered in droves, their bodies strewn like withered leaves upon the battlefield. The Balrogs, those ancient spirits of fire, fought with a fury unmatched. Yet one by one, they were hunted down and destroyed, until only a handful survived, fleeing into the deep places of the world, where they would slumber in shadow for ages to come. But Morgoth had yet to reveal his deadliest weapons. In the final years of the war, as his armies crumbled and his strongholds fell, he unleashed the full terror of his winged dragons. These were no mere fire drakes of old, but creatures of an even darker design. Beasts whose vast wings eclipsed the sun, whose breath turned armies to ash, and whose very presence sowed terror among the Valinorian ranks. At their head was Ancalagon the Black, the greatest of all dragons, whose wings were said to stretch across the horizon. It was then that the battle reached its peak, the heavens alight with fire and death. The eagles of Manwë, led by Thorondor, soared into the storm, clashing with Morgoth's winged terrors in a battle that raged above the ruined lands. Many of the great eagles fell, torn from the sky or consumed by dragonfire, yet they did not falter. And in the end, it was Eärendil, the mariner, who struck the decisive blow. Aboard his ship Vingelat, now sailing the firmament as a star, he led the charge against Ancalagon, wielding a blade of light forged in the west. The duel shook the very heavens, until at last, after a struggle that lasted an entire day, Eärendil cast down the black worm, and Ancalagon fell from the sky. His body, a mountain of scales and ruin, crashed upon the towers of Thangorodrim, breaking the peaks asunder. The impact was so great that the earth itself shuddered, sending tremors through the lands of Middle-earth. Morgoth's last and greatest champion was slain, and with him the power of the Dark Lord was utterly broken. Now at last the hosts of Aman breached the gates of Angband, and in his final desperation Morgoth cowered deep within his fortress, seeking to hide from the judgment of the Valar. But there would be no mercy. The end of Morgoth was neither glorious nor defiant. Unlike his former lieutenant Sauron, who would later rise again in subtlety and deceit, Morgoth met his fate as a craven, stripped of all but his terror. When the Valar's host stormed into Angband, tearing through the ruined gates and delving into its blackest pits, they found not a dark lord clad in dreadful majesty, but a trembling being, reduced to fear and despair. He had forsaken his own legions, hiding deep within his throne room, unable to wield his former strength. Fionwe, the herald of Manwë, stood before him, and with the voice of the Elder King he pronounced Morgoth's doom. The Dark Lord, once mightiest of the Ainur, was cast down, bound in unbreakable chains. The very ones he had worn long ages before reforged anew. No plea for mercy was granted, no bargain was entertained. The Valar would not kill him, for his spirit, though broken, was still mighty, and to slay him would release his malice into the very fabric of the world. Instead, they dragged him from his ruined stronghold, and before the assembled host of Aman and the freed peoples of Middle-earth, Morgoth was judged. Then, as the final act of the War of Wrath, the Dark Lord was thrust through the doors of night, cast into the timeless void beyond the circles of the world. There he would remain, his spirit exiled into darkness, awaiting the doom of Arda, when prophecy foretold that he would break through the void once more in a battle that would end the world itself. But for the first age at least, Morgoth was no more. Yet victory did not come without cost. The ruin of Beleriand was beyond reckoning. The fury of the War of Wrath had not only slain Morgoth's minions, but had also shattered the very land. The battles of gods and demons had shaken the foundations of the earth, and with Ancalagon's fall and the destruction of Angband, the land itself could bear no more. The western lands of Middle-earth began to sink. The rivers of Sirion and Gelion, once lifelines of the great realms, were swallowed by the sea. The lands of Doriath, Nargothrond and Gondolin, all the last remnants of the Eldar's glory, were lost beneath the waves. Only a few islands remained, where once great kingdoms stood, the last echoes of a drowned world. Many of the elves, their long war finally ended, chose then to leave Middle-earth, answering the call of the Valar to sail westward into the Undying Lands. But not all departed. Some, like Gil-galad, would remain to forge a new age in the east, building new realms in the shadow of a world forever changed. The War of Wrath had brought the end of Morgoth's reign, but it had also reshaped the world. A chapter had closed, but the echoes of this war would ripple through history, for in the ruins left behind, another darkness would soon rise. One that had learned from Morgoth's fall and would seek dominion not through brute force alone, but through lies and shadow. And so, with Morgoth cast into the void and Beleriand drowned beneath the sea, the first age of Middle-earth came to an end. Yet the scars of the War of Wrath would linger for all time, woven into the fate of Arda itself. For though Morgoth was banished, his shadow remained, deep in the fabric of the world. His will had been so vast, his malice so enduring, that it could not be wholly undone. The very land bore the weight of his evil, and from the ruins of his dominion, his servants scattered into the dark places of the earth. Among them was Sauron, once Morgoth's most trusted lieutenant, who had fled into hiding before the war was lost. Unlike his master, Sauron did not wait to be judged. He abandoned Angband before its fall, slipping into the shadows, unwilling to face the wrath of the Valar. It is said that Eonwe, the herald of Manwë, called upon him to repent, to return to the west and seek pardon, but Sauron, ever cunning, feared the judgment of the Valar and instead chose another path. He would not make war upon the world as Morgoth had. but he would seek to control it through deception and influence. Thus, the seeds of the Second Age were sown in the very hour of Morgoth's defeat. But it was not only the servants of darkness who were left to reckon with the world's ruin. The Edain, the race of men who had fought beside the elves in defiance of Morgoth, were granted a great reward. The Valar, in their mercy, granted them a new land, an island raised from the sea and blessed beyond all mortal lands. This was Númenor, the land of the star where the greatest of men would dwell, far from the growing darkness of Middle-earth. Yet, even in this gift, the doom of the world could be glimpsed, for the hearts of men were ever prone to desire more than they were given. And so the war that had nearly destroyed Middle-earth came to its end. The lands of the First Age were lost, buried beneath the waves, their glory remembered only in song and legend. The elves who remained would never again wield such power as they had in days of old, for the world had changed, and the light of Aman had grown more distant. The Valar too withdrew from Middle-earth, leaving the fate of its people to their own choices, for they had intervened in wrath, but they would not rule. Yet, though the storm had passed, Middle-earth would never be free of shadow. Morgoth was gone, but his will endured. The great enemy had fallen, but his disciple would rise. The world had been saved, but at a terrible cost. The War of Wrath was the greatest conflict ever fought upon the face of Ardar, and in its wake, nothing would ever be the same. And so the tale is told, passed down through the ages in whispers and in song. The war that nearly unmade the world, the wrath of the Valar unleashed upon Morgoth, and the drowning of a land that would never rise again. A tale of doom, of loss, and of change. A tale of endings and of the darkness yet to come.